Okay, so thank you all for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you being here. We know that everyone's busy, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to meet with us and learn about the options that you have in regards to the maintenance districts in your community. The city's been working with CivicMic.com to educate.com, not CivicMic.com, CivicMic staff to educate the community about the landscaping lighting districts in your community. So our primary goal here is to provide sufficient information so you can make an informed decision about the services that are provided in your community and then the associated funding. There's a lot of people still jumping on here, so I don't want people to miss things, but we're going to go ahead and move forward. So tonight we'll cover some information that was shared in previous meetings, but we want to bring everyone up to speed. We want to cover the history of the district and the loan options that we've been recently talking about in the poll, funding details, the survey and poll results, as well as how you can get engaged in the future. To respect everyone's time, we are going to keep the meeting at a minimum or a maximum of an hour. So right around an hour, we'll be wrapping it up, the questions. We will share this presentation on civicmic.com/Fairfield. If you haven't visited the website, there's tons of useful information there. Educational materials. It will be very helpful to lead you through this process that we'll be covering over almost the next year. And Michelle from CivicMic will go over that in later detail in the presentation. So I have a few ground rules that I want to cover to ensure that we respect everyone's time and personal viewpoints. As I mentioned, we'll keep this to an hour. If you can hold questions until the end of all presentations, if you have a question, write it down so you don't forget it. But at the end of all the presentations, that's when we'll go to questions. To finish the meeting in a timely manner, we may have to answer some questions offline, and that's okay. So you can reach out to us. We'll give you the various ways to reach out to us, civicmic.com/Fairfield. We have a 1-800 number. Our emails will provide all of that at the end of the presentation and in the chat, so you can have that information to contact us directly. To help with background noise, we will keep everyone on mute. We want to make sure that everyone's able to hear the presentations, and we want you to respect others. So stay on mute if you can, so everyone's able to hear and doesn't hear the background noise. So our public engagement process aims to gather feedback from various demographics with diverse values. With that being said, we want to hear from all participants that may not have the same perspective as you or viewpoints as you, but we will attempt to shield everyone from personal attacks. So while I don't think this will happen, if anyone uses foul language or makes personal attacks, we'll move you to a private meeting room, and then the moderator will let you stay there for a few minutes and then allow you to return to the meeting. But if the unacceptable behavior continues, we will remove you from the meeting and you will not be allowed to return. So like I said, I don't think that's going to happen because we have a good group of people here. I recognize a lot of faces, a lot of people we've talked to already. So with that being said, I think we'll move on to our first presentation, which is Chris Lewis, management analyst from the city of Fairfield, and she's going to cover the history of the districts and some information about the loan.
Yes, thank you everybody for attending. First, I'd like to start by, first, I do have a lot of information to cover, so forgive me if I'm speaking a little fast, but I do know we have that hour time limit, so I want to make sure I get through all this information here. I'd like to start by giving everyone a brief definition of what a landscaping and lighting maintenance district is, or LLMD. LLMDs are funding mechanisms used by local government to provide an enhanced level of landscaping and lighting service in a defined geographic area. The majority, if not all, of those services that the district provides confers a special benefit to a specific community and are therefore funded by that specific community. Any portion of services that provide a general benefit to the general public is funded by the city itself. We do have NBS to talk a little bit about how that's determined later on in this presentation. So why are LLMDs formed? These districts are often formed at the request of a developer prior to or at the same time a specific community is being built. And from a developer perspective, establishing a mechanism that provides enhanced levels of service are more likely to increase property values and attract more buyers. Some developers choose to form an HOA, some just choose the LLMD, and in fact, some actually choose both to provide separate but complementary services. And there are various reasons why a developer would choose one or another, but the bottom line is that they want to, they typically, excuse me, the bottom line is that they want to provide those higher level of services. And that these districts are established at the time the community is established or prior to any individual or property owner taking ownership of that property. When you purchased your property, there was a line item on your disclosures that informs you of these higher levels of service. So we have had some questions about how LLMD assessments relate to property taxes, and if LLMD assessments should be reduced based on the higher dollar amount of property taxes one pays in an area with higher property values versus the lower dollar amount another property owner pays in an area with lower property values. The short answer to this question is no. LLMD assessments should not be lowered based on the dollar amount of property taxes you pay, because essentially all property owners pay their fair proportional share of 1% property tax. All of that goes towards general countywide and citywide services that benefit the entire community, such as fire, police, parks, library, etc. And it's not specifically for any one neighborhood or geographic area. So we can't really equate paying a higher dollar amount, a higher property tax dollar amount with being entitled to receiving a higher level of service, since none of those property taxes are meant for the special benefit of any one community. You may see some other charges on your property tax bill that are collected for previously defined purposes other than landscaping and lighting services. And with that being said, your LLMD assessments do show up on your property tax bill. They're collected along with your property taxes in accordance with the 1972 Landscaping and Lighting Act, but they're not directly related to the property taxes. I just wanted to make sure I got that out of the way so we could really focus on just the LLMD assessments and the special benefit that it provides to your specific community. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So the LLMDs 7, 11, and 13 were formed between 1988 and 1990. And with the exception of a few of the more recent annexations in LLMD 13 North Cordelia, all the district's maximum assessment rates have remained unchanged and do not have a built-in inflator to mitigate the effects of rising costs over time since the date that they were established. These districts have managed to sustain services for about 30 years without an increase to the established maximum assessment rates. But we're at a point now where those rising costs and just general inflation over time have exceeded the revenue that the city's authorized to collect. So it's time for the community now to make some decisions as to the level of service that they would like to receive and the assessments that they're willing to pay for the next 30 years. And 30 years is just an estimated number. Don't hold me to that. We'd like it to last that long. Next slide, please. This is a graphical representation of those costs exceeding revenues in rolling hills over at least the last 5 fiscal years. The blue line is the revenues and the orange line are the expenditures. There's been a shortfall of as much as $250,000 back in fiscal year 2021 for this district. Next slide, please. Paradise Valley, a similar graph here, you'll see that there's been a shortfall of as high as nearly $70,000 in fiscal year 1920. Again, that blue line is revenues and orange line is expenditures. You'll see some small increases to the revenues, which account for some of the recent development that was activated and issued their certificates of occupancy in that area, as well as some other small miscellaneous revenues that the district received. Next slide. In North Cordelia, same thing. Expenditures have exceeded revenues. And in 17-18, that gap was as high as $150,000. So again, with some new development in this area and some portions of this district has a built-in CPI. So you'll see a bit of an increase in revenue over the last 5 years. So In previous, well, that's okay. In previous years, the districts were able to draw on their,
You went to look for one, you said it didn't make me one.
in previous years, the districts were able to draw on reserve funds, or what we refer to as fund balance, to kind of make up some of that gap. But staff projected that these fund balances would be depleted in fiscal year 21-22, the current year that we're in, if the services were to be provided at the same levels that have been provided for the previous years. Next slide. So in June 2021, during the annual budget and assessment approval proceedings, staff offered the proposed solution of reducing services in fiscal year 21-22 in order to prevent the district from falling into a total cash deficit. During that time, we would conduct a community engagement process and Prop 218 balloting procedures, which would give the property owners the opportunity to decide the level of service that you would like to see and the maximum assessment level that you would like to pay for fiscal years 23, 24, and beyond. This solution was accepted by council and it is still the plan. However, in December 2021, after hearing from some of the community members, council asked staff to come up with some creative solutions, which would allow the district to provide those same, enhanced levels of service while we went through this community engagement process. So we wouldn't, they were looking for solutions so that we didn't have to reduce those services. And one of these solutions was to issue a general fund loan to the districts. In January 2022, staff held a town hall to inform residents of this proposed loan and to receive feedback. In February 22, staff reported the results of that engagement to council and was directed to issue the loan. In March of 2022, staff was ready to present the final terms to council and presented the resolutions to execute that loan. Council wanted us to just make sure that all community members were in favor of this loan. So they directed us to do 60 more days of community engagement, which leads us to where we're at today. April 1st of this year, a poll was released with information regarding the loan. And right now we're holding the town hall to just further determine whether the communities are in favor of or against receiving this loan in order to maintain enhanced levels of service through fiscal year 22-23. The Prop 218 process and all the work groups we're going to have during 22-23 will determine the rates starting fiscal year 23-24. And the final row there on that timeline is that staff will be reporting the results of the poll and town hall to council in May for further direction. Just to confirm, our goal today with you is to provide you with enough information to be able to move forward in this community engagement process and provide you with enough information for you to provide us with feedback about how you prefer your support or whether you're for or against this loan, and then also to make an informed decision when you take the poll about this loan. But regardless of whatever decisions are made today, and regardless of whatever the poll results show, we will be coming back to the community through work groups and other meetings to determine what services and rates you would like to see in fiscal year 23 and 24. So this loan is just to carry us through fiscal year 22-23. Okay, next slide, please. And so you're wondering, what are these loan amounts that we keep talking about and what are the terms? So in order to provide services, those enhanced levels of service through fiscal year 22-23, and in order to pay for the community engagement services, the assessment engineering services that we'll need, and the Prop 218 balloting consulting fees necessary, we will need loans of $410,000 in Rolling Hills, $175,000 in Paradise Valley, and $151,000 in North Cordelia. All of these loans will be issued at 0% interest and be repayable over 5 years. Now, these loans are based on the most recent and best information we had available to us just prior to releasing the poll. These estimates do include actual expenditures that have hit the books through February of 2022. We still have, 4 months left and some invoices that may lag behind. And we really tried to be conservative to make sure we weren't requesting a higher loan amount than we actually needed, because obviously the property owners are going to be, repaying this loan. So we tried to make sure we were conservative in that. Next slide, please. So naturally, after hearing what the total loan amount is, you're probably wondering, what is your annual payment going to be? I'll start off with Rolling Hills. In the Rolling Hills community, there's a portion of property owners who pay $250 per year, and the remaining portion of the property owners pay $300 per year. This was decided at the time the district was established, and it's based off the special benefit that each group of property owners receives. So each individual parcel that pays $250 per year pays the equivalent of 0.08% of the total assessments that are collected for the district, which is about $315,000. And likewise, the people who pay $300 per year pay a total of about 0.1% of the total collected for the district. The loan repayment amounts are determined using those same percentages. So 0.08% of the total loan of $410,000 is $325.21. If we spread that over 5 years, the annual loan payment for someone who is currently paying $250, their annual loan payment will be $65.04. Applying that same calculation to the $300 parcels, 0.1% of the total $410,000 loan is $390.26. So those property owners will be paying $78.05 each year for 5 years to repay this $410,000 loan. The loan repayment amounts are directly proportionate to the share of total assessments you are currently paying. Next slide, please. We apply the same methodology to the Paradise Valley district, where most people are paying $190 per year. Those other two really large assessment amounts are the Paradise Valley Estates and the Extension, so they're in their own category. But every other home is paying $190 per year, which equates to 0.07% of the total $175,000 loan. So each property owner will pay $25.65 per year for 5 years to repay the loan. And lastly, we have North Cordelia. North Cordelia has a few more different areas and a few more different assessment rates. These three assessment rates right here, $170, $180, and $850.45 represent the most common assessment rates we see in this district. So I'll just, you can take a look at this chart and see that the people who are paying $170 right now, their loan repayment amount will be $8.48 and so on and so forth. If your assessment rate is not listed on this chart, right below the chart, there are some instructions on how you can figure out your loan repayment amount. This presentation will be available to you on the CivicMic.com website, but the easier option, and probably the one you should probably go with, is just to call CivicMic directly, send them an email or call them, send them a message, and they can just tell you what your assessment or what your loan repayment amount will be if it's not listed here on this chart. Next slide, please. So that's what the loan repayment amount would be, but we have 4 different scenarios that can impact what your assessment amount is and ultimately whether or not you will be paying that loan over the next 5 years. There's a lot of information here on this chart, so we're just going to go row by row. This chart will help you and guide, help you make your decision whether or not you support receiving the loan or not. But just keep in mind there are 4 different scenarios that can happen between now and the end of 22-23. So the first one here in that first row, this one is pretty easy. You see in the actions taken column, the first scenario is that the loan is not issued. The community members decide they don't want to make a loan payment. And after we go through this community engagement process, the community members also decide they don't want to increase their assessments, and they're happy with where they are and what they're paying. So what this means is that beginning in 22-23 and beyond forevermore until something changes, like another Prop 218 vote, services will continue to be reduced over time to match whatever revenue the district receives, for any given year. And of course, costs keep rising, so your dollar will go, less and less far over time because of those inflation rates. So you'll see in that first scenario, no loan, no new assessments. In 22-23, you'll keep paying your current assessments, and in 23-24 and beyond, you'll keep paying your current assessments. In the second scenario, during that second row there, you'll see that this one includes the loan not being issued. So the community members take the poll and they say, no, thank you, we prefer to just not take the loan. However, after going through the community engagement process, residents decide that they do want to enhance their services and they are willing to pay. So those new assessments are approved. What's going to happen in this scenario is in that second column, you'll see the effect on services. Since no loan was taken in fiscal year 22-23, the services will be reduced to match whatever revenue we have, because remember, we didn't get the loan, so we can't increase the services. And in fiscal year 22-23, you'll see you're continuing to pay your same rates that you're paying. However, in fiscal year 23-24, we will start providing those new and enhanced services that the community voted for, and the community will start paying those new assessments that they voted for. So that one is kind of also, easy. The third scenario, the third possible scenario is that the loan is issued. So everybody right now is in support of the loan, but after we go through this year-long process, the community decides they actually don't want to increase their services and they don't want to increase their assessments. So since the loan was issued, we're going to go ahead and use that loan for what it's for. And in 22-23, we're going to bump up those services, provide services that are comparable to what was provided in previous years. I'm sorry, did I say that they're not approved? This third possible scenario is that the loan is issued and that the new assessments are approved. Sorry, just to clarify, we're on the third possible outcome here. In 23-24, you will end up paying the loan amount plus the new assessments that were approved during this community engagement process. So that's scenario number 3. And in the fourth and final scenario is that last row there. This is the situation in which the loan is issued, but the community members go through this engagement process over the next year and they decide that they do not want increased assessments. In this scenario, we will provide the increased services during fiscal year 22-23, because that's what we received a loan for. But in fiscal year 23-24 and beyond, we will reduce the services to match whatever revenue is available in any given year. The tricky part in this scenario is what happens to the assessments that you pay. It is not, you're not going to keep paying your current assessment plus the loan amount. If you look in the column titled fiscal year 23-24 through fiscal year 27-28, you'll notice that the loan payment amount represents a portion of your current assessments. So in this case, you will continue to pay whatever you're paying right now, but a portion of what you're paying is going to go towards the loan payment, and the remainder of that assessment is going to go towards actual services. So I want to spend a little time. Yep, thank you very much. I want to spend a little more time on this fourth scenario because it is a little bit more confusing. And I know that there's a lot on this slide here. Up top is that same fourth row that you saw, same fourth scenario. And I'd like to give you an example of the assessments and what portion is going to go towards your loan and what portion is going to go towards your services. In this example, your current assessment in fiscal year 21-22 is $100. A loan is issued to you and it's approved with a $25 annual repayment amount for 5 years, beginning in fiscal year 23-24. We go through this engagement process. A new assessment is not approved. So you'll notice in the chart to the right there that beginning in 23-24, when your first loan payment is actually due, you're still going to pay just that $100 assessment, but $75 of that is going towards your services, but only $75 is going toward your services and $25 is going towards the loan payment. So less of your $100 assessment is actually going towards services. So in this case, you're going to be paying the same amount that you've always paid, but you'll notice an accelerated decrease in services because 1, you have to make the loan payment, and 2, costs for services are only going to continue to go up. Inflation is only going to continue to go up, and it's really going to devalue what your dollars are worth over time. So you won't be paying any more, your amount won't go up, but the services that you'll actually receive will go down at an accelerated rate. So out of all 4 possible scenarios, this option will result in a faster decline in services over time. That was a lot of information, but feel free to reference these slides after or ask questions towards the end. I'll turn it back over to NBS now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Now, Sarah Maris from NBS will cover funding details for the assessment.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Mears with NBS. I am the director of our district formation consulting team, and I work with the formation and other aspects of landscape maintenance districts on behalf of NBS for cities and other local government agencies throughout the state. Next slide. This is just a quick agenda. We'll talk about the legislative context and some of the assessment factors, and we'll give you a timeline. Next slide, please. Again, as Chris mentioned, we're trying to stay on time here, so apologies for trying to move along quickly and talk quickly so that you do have time for questions. We'll spend some time here on the legislative context. We'll talk about Proposition 13 because that's where generally local government revenues changed very significantly, and the reason that we are looking at an assessment district. We'll talk about Proposition 218 and Proposition 26. All 3 of those are voter initiatives that were passed by voters in California over the years. And then we'll talk a little bit more about specifically the Landscape and Lighting Act of 1972, which is the Landscape and Lighting Act of 1972 is the authorizing legislation for these types of districts. Next slide. So Proposition 13, as I mentioned, this is an initiative that was approved by voters in 1978. So you can raise your hand real quickly if you remember voting on this measure, or leave it down if you prefer not to share your age with everyone on the call. The effect of Proposition 13 was to limit the value increase of your general property tax to 2% a year. So even though right now we're in an environment where the value of your home, the market value of your home is increasing more than 2% a year, the value that your general property taxes is based on is limited to an increase of only 2% each year. It also set a 1% rate cap on ad valorem or value-based property taxes. Those are the general property taxes that local governments receive. So every property pays that 1% ad valorem property tax on the value of your property. Again, that value is limited to 2% a year. And then that 1% total property tax is split up among all of the agencies that serve your property. So in this case, it's the city of Fairfield, it's the county of Solano, it may be, mosquito abatement districts or water districts or various other types of districts that serve the community, all get a share of that 1%. And that was all set at the time of the adoption of Proposition 13. Proposition 13 added the Article 13A to California's Constitution. Next slide. So a few years later, we have another initiative that comes before voters in California called Proposition 218. This one in 1996. Proposition 218 added some additional rules about assessment districts. And the Landscape and Lighting Maintenance Assessment District that we're talking about is an assessment. There are strict rules about how assessments are calculated. It involves an engineer's report that's prepared and signed and stamped by a registered professional engineer. And there's a process by which the assessments have to be approved by property owners called a protest ballot proceeding. I'll talk a little bit more about how that works later. And it also says that government-owned property is not exempt. So the assessment amount charged to each parcel of land within the assessment district has to be based on the amount of special benefit that is accrued to property by the improvements and maintenance and operation of those improvements identified in the engineer's report. And Proposition 218 added Articles 13C and D to the California Constitution. Next slide. So just a few years later, we have another initiative that came before voters in California, Proposition 26 in 2010, added the definition of a tax to California Constitution. This made amendments to Article 13C that was previously added by Proposition 218. And what it tells us is that we basically now have 3 different categories of additional revenue that can be collected by local government agencies. Aside from your general property tax, there is a special tax. That's a type of charge that requires a 2/3 vote of registered voters. There are fees which have to be allocated based on the cost of providing service, and there are assessments which are allocated based on the special benefit received by properties based on the improvements and services provided. Next slide. So in that context, the Landscape and Lighting Act of 1972 is authorizing assessments to be collected. And with that, they are allowed to fund generally the maintenance and operation of parks, landscaping, street lights, traffic lights, those types of improvements. Of course, it's called the Landscape and Lighting Act. So those are generally the types of improvements that can be funded with this particular mechanism. It does require that engineer's report that I mentioned because it's an assessment district. The engineer's report has to have the basis and schedule of assessment. So we have to tell you in that engineer's report what the rates are, how the assessment is proportionally allocated to each individual parcel within the district, and what is the separation of general benefit, which is benefit conferred to the community at large, versus special benefit, which is benefit conferred specifically to property in the district. So again, separate that general and special benefit, take that special benefit amount and allocate that to properties within the assessment district. If you want more information, that is found, the Landscape and Lighting Act of 1972 is found in the Streets and Highways Code section 22500. Next slide. So assessment engineering is a process that we go through for each individual assessment district that we're looking at. So in the case of the districts that we're here to talk about tonight, we will be going through the same process for each district, looking at all of the factors for each individual district in order to determine what the assessment amount will be in the future when we're ready to come back around and give you that information, provide you with the allocation of assessment for that increased high level of service. So the first step is to identify exactly what improvements are going to be maintained, determine the maintenance cost estimate, identify all of the parcels that benefit from the maintenance of those improvements, separate that general benefit that's conferred to the public at large from the special benefit that is conferred to each of the parcels within the assessment district, allocate the proportional special benefit to the parcels. So for example, that can look like benefit points that are assigned to parcels based on factors such as land use, perhaps size of property or frontage information. Those are all possibilities of ways that the assessment can be allocated proportionately And then once we've come up with that methodology, we'll take that cost estimate and calculate the assessment to be levied on each individual parcel within the district. Next slide. We have a proposed schedule here for you. We'll spend the time between now and the end of that should say December of 22, not 23. I just noticed we'll spend this calendar year essentially doing this public outreach, doing this engagement, gathering data. We'll be working on that general and special benefit analysis and the engineer's report. So all of those steps that I just outlined will be work that is occurring between now and the end of the year. We'll be looking at April 2023 to have the first step of the legislative process to adopt the new assessment. That meeting is called our intent meeting, and there is a resolution of intention that is considered by City Council. That resolution of intention includes that engineer's report that I discussed. Following that meeting, assuming that that resolution is approved by City Council, ballots will be mailed to property owners. The ballots, again, it's a property owner protest proceeding. So if you are a renter, perhaps in a property, and someone else owns the property, it is the owner who has the ability to cast a ballot. That's by virtue of state law. Registration of voters and what have you is not what we're looking at here. The ballots are weighted according to the financial obligation of each property. And so that's your assessment amount. Again, I talked about that a little bit. We're going to allocate that assessment amount. So if I own a property in the district and my assessment amount is $10, and Danielle owns a property in the district and her assessment amount is $5, that means my ballot is weighted twice as much as hers because my financial obligation in the district is twice as much as hers. So again, ballots weighted on the assessment amount assigned to each property. Those will be mailed out at least 45 days prior to the public hearing that would be held in June. In June, that public hearing would be opened, obviously an opportunity for property owners to hear and be heard on the matter. And then following the close of the public hearing, that's when ballots would be tabulated to determine whether or not there is a majority protest. So of the ballots returned, we would look at the total financial obligation who cast their ballot in favor, and we'd look at the total financial obligation of the ballots cast in opposition. If those cast in opposition are weighted higher or the dollar amount associated with them is greater than those in favor, then we have a majority protest and the district may not be formed. To say that another way, if the dollar amount in favor is greater than the dollar amount in opposition, we can move forward with the resolution of formation at that council meeting. And that's essentially the process that we go through to form the district. And again, this is the general timeline. Just change that December 23 to December 22, and that will be accurate. And I will, I'll make sure that that change is updated on the version of this that's posted on the website. And next slide, please. I know I put a slide in for questions, but I think we're holding those all till the end. So,
right. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was a lot of information. So, Chris, followed by Sarah. You all have heard a ton of detailed information. Hopefully, you know, you can absorb some of that, but like we said, the presentation will be put on civicmic.com so you can go and rewatch it if you'd like. Now we have Michelle Argerich-Valentine, who will go over very quickly ways for you to get engaged and some lighter information, some of the poll and survey results as they stand now. Michelle?
All right. Like Danielle said, I'm Michelle Argerich-Valentine, and I see a lot of familiar faces here. And so I just wanted to welcome everybody that I see. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over some of the survey results. I want to let you know that for Rolling Hills, we have had 243 survey responses, which is really, really great. As well as for I'm sorry, Paradise Valley, we've had 66. And then for North Cordelia, we've had about 45. So make sure that you are going out there and letting people in your community know that those surveys are up, and we'll talk more about that later on in the presentation as well. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. So for the survey, we for the are you aware of the services in your services your LLMD provides? We have a lot of yeses, which is really great. And then go ahead and go to the next one. Are you aware that your property tax bill includes a line item for the LLMD by the city? Again, a lot of yeses, some no's, especially in North Cordelia, it's getting, it's a little more. And also that's where we have the least amount of responses. So definitely want to engage there. And then go ahead and go to the next one. And then are you aware of the boundaries of your LLMD? Again, more yeses than there are no's. These are really questions to find out what people know within the districts. And so if you did answer no, or if you do know somebody who answered no, I hope that this meeting, that civicmic.com/Fairfield can answer some of these questions, and that you can really be informed once you get that ballot, so that you can make decisions. You can make decisions on the loan and make those decisions for your community and for yourself and your families. Go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so is it important that my city continues to provide landscaping maintenance and improvements in my area? You can see that people strongly agree with this. Landscaping is important according to this poll, and people really value it. So go ahead and go to the next slide. When it comes to your community landscaping, list the following in order. So safety tended to be the #1 in all the district, and then closely behind scenery and cost effectiveness tended to be really up there as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, this is always a funny one to me. I am willing to pay a larger assessment than I do now to maintain landscaping services at the level provided in 2021. Now you see that strongly agree is less. People say it's important, but that financial aspect definitely always comes into play. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Along with a larger assessment, I would support an additional amount to allow the city to provide services beyond what it provided in 2021. This is in addition to, so if you want even better services, this is, you know, a lot of people are that neither agree or disagree. I can only imagine that's as you gain more information that people will have a stronger viewpoint on this. You see that there are some strongly agrees, a lot of strongly disagrees, and it's kind of everywhere at this point. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And then I am comfortable paying a certain percentage more than what I currently pay. A lot of people said none of the above. And then 10% seems to be up there with the amount people would be willing to pay. All right, so that was our survey. If you have questions about that, we will go into questions a little bit later. And now for the poll results. Our poll was a second poll that we had, or our first poll, 3 questions about the loan. And so if you took it, here are some of the results that we've gotten so far. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I support a loan to subsidize the revenues needed to maintain services comparable to the fiscal year 2020-2021 and avoid reductions in the quality of the landscaping. Yeah, so a lot of people are strongly agreeing to this. If you would like to retake the poll after you've learned more about it today, please feel free to retake it. Go ahead and just email us and let us know, and we can definitely allow you to retake that if you've changed your mind. And so, yeah, so right now we are strongly agree that people really want to want it to continue. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And then I'm willing to pay a higher assessment for 5 years to pay both the new assessment amount and the new district to repay the loan needed to maintain landscaping. Again, strongly agree, is definitely ahead there. And go ahead and go to the next one. Now, this one is really important because I see a lot of no's. So I am aware that if the new district is formed, I will not have to pay, I will still have to pay back the loan over 5 years. And so a majority said yes, which is really great. But those no's, I really want to emphasize that if the loan is taken, then even if the Prop 218 fails, that you will have to pay that loan back over 5 years. So that would mean a reduction of services. And if it was, then again, that just like Chris said in that one chart, that you will have to repay that loan if it is approved. All right, so now for the more fun stuff, go ahead and go to the next slide. If you haven't taken the survey or the poll, or like I said, if you've changed your mind, if you've learned something today or on the website that you've decided that you maybe feel differently, please feel free to retake it and let us know. And then you can always take that poll and that survey at civicmic.com/Fairfield. You're going to find a lot of information there. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Sign up for updates. This is the best way to stay informed and make sure that you are in the know about your district. We will send updates on the polls, on the surveys. If we have another community meeting, all of that will be posted, be sent to you via email if you sign up for updates. So be sure to do that. It's definitely the best way to stay informed. And then go ahead and go to the next slide. The community working group. If you are interested in joining the working group, please email us at contact@civicmic.com. We are going to have a meeting on April 28th at 6 p.m. And so the working group is really a community-based group that is going to just make sure that people are informed about the district, about the LLMDs, about the situations that are going on. If you are for, if you are against it, it doesn't matter. We are really just there to keep people informed and make sure that people are able to make informed decisions with the knowledge that they have. And so please come join us. And then if anybody who is on the working group now wants to go off mic just for a second and invite some people on, that would be lovely, not putting anybody on the spot, but if somebody from the working group wanted to do that, that would be wonderful.
We see some of you out there.
I see, yeah.
Your community members, and there are many of your community members already working on helping to engage their neighbors. So.
This is Pam Bertani. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank
Yes,
you,
ma'am.
Pam.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the comprehensive presentation. My concern is that we have about 8 minutes left.
Yes, Pam, we're going to move right into questions right now after this.
But I don't think that 8 minutes is sufficient time.
We'll give a little bit of extra time. We're not going to cut off right at an hour. We did go over in our presentation time sharing a lot of detailed information. So we'll see how people are going. As long as a lot of people don't start dropping off, we don't want people to miss the answers to questions. So as long as everyone's hanging on with us, we'll stay answering questions.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that people that have questions are able to ask those questions, because that was a lot of information, very comprehensive,
Way too much.
very detailed,
Way too much.
very dense. And so I just think that, you know, I mean, I appreciate your I appreciate your presentation.
Okay, let's move into questions then so we can get some of those answered. I'll go ahead and let you know what the question format's going to look like. So we will open it. We want to go between different people, those who are on the phone as well as those who are on video and some that would like to chat. So we ask that everyone stay muted. Please don't do any grandstanding. We're here to talk about the items that we've covered tonight and answer questions to those items. So we don't want to waste any time, kind of talking about rehashing things that have happened in the past or anything like that. So if you can keep your questions to the items covered tonight, anything that you may think we have missed, and one question per person. So if you ask a question and fold in 3 questions, we're going to go with your first one, and then we're going to move to another property owner so we can get as many questions answered as possible. So at this point, I'll go ahead. If you want to raise your hand, you can do that on your screen there, and everyone stay on mute, and we'll select someone that's raised their hand, and I'll ask for someone to unmute and say your first and last name, and then we'll go with that person. So right now we have a hand raised by Sam. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I have a question. Do I understand correctly that we're going to borrow money to pay for service for 1 year and then repay that service over 5 years?
Yes, that is correct. Well, that's one proposed solution. So we are looking for feedback from the community via the poll and this town hall meeting, whether residents are in support of that or against that.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone, we'll have Nora with your hand raised. Nora?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. My question is, you've got a lot of residents that are in the LLMDs. Let's say that the majority just never respond. Does that count as a no vote?
Sarah?
A no vote towards the poll, when you say respond, do you mean in the poll or as we go through the Prop 218 process for new assessment?
When you actually send out the ballot and you're asking for an approval or disapproval, will a no response count as a no vote?
No, it does not. The ballot tabulation is based on the ballots received. So we will tabulate only those ballots received, and we'll look at the amount in favor and the amount in opposition. So if you do not submit a ballot at all, you are essentially not counted in the process.
Thank you. Very informative.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Randy, go ahead. Mark, we'll call on you next.
Oh,
Hello?
Yes, Randy, go ahead.
Okay, my question has to do with the substantial increase in costs that occurred a couple of years ago. According to the chart that you showed, I'm wondering if there's any information on what caused that to happen.
Which district are you referring to?
Rolling Hills.
Rolling Hills. There was a new contract. The previous contract ended, and so an RFP went out around fiscal year 2020.
RFP.
And the bids that came back were much higher than anticipated, as much as 50% higher than anticipated. So in order to provide services, the city went with the lowest bid at the time.
And the scope of services was the same?
You know, I don't have that right in front of me here,
okay.
But I believe that the scope of services was substantially the same.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Mark, if you'd like to unmute and ask a question.
Please. Well, can I make just a real quick couple of comments? Number one, this is for Paradise Valley. We would like to remove Manual Campus and the freeway from our district. That would save a lot of money. And we would like the oversight budget, which is 70,000, reduced quite a bit. And my other thought that's never come up tonight is, guess what? Is there an adult in the room? We're in a drought. We can't afford Shangri-La right at the moment. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. We will cover those items in more detail as we continue to move on with the engagement process. We'll have individual meetings for each community. This will be the last meeting that we do as a group setting in this manner, but we really wanted to get through the poll questions so we could get responses to the council. So thank you for that input, Mark. We will definitely make sure to cover that in more detail in the future. Carol.
You're on mute, Carol.
I'm unmuting. There we go. Chris, quick question. Could you explain just a little bit more about the enhanced services versus what's left? And I live in Rolling Hills, and I realize all 3 districts are going to run out of funding, but we have $81,000. And what does that mean if that runs out in fiscal year this year at the end of June versus enhanced?
So the enhanced level of service that we're referring to is if we were approved for the loan, we would provide services that are comparable to the services that were provided in fiscal year 21-22 and previous. So that's just that full level of service prior to the reductions that actually happened starting January 1, 2022 of this year. Remember, those reductions were proposed back in June of 2021 at the beginning of this whole budgeting process to make sure that the budget was balanced and we didn't have a cash deficit. So those enhanced level of services really just mean what was provided, in previous years.
Exactly. But when I have talked to a lot of neighbors, and so have a lot, I see some of my neighbors on here, they don't know if it's mowing, or is it watering, what is the level of service. So when you're talking about that, I think you're talking to an audience that doesn't know exactly what it is they're receiving.
Right, that's good feedback there. When we took the contracts to be reduced back in December of 2021, I can't recall 100%. I'm not sure if the chart, we created a chart to show, in 1920 or previous, you received mowing 4 times a week. And then, now what we're proposing as a reduction of services is mowing 2 times a week, as an example, right? So we do have a chart available. What I can do is give that chart to CivicMic so they can post it on the website. And that way,
I think that's what all 3 districts need, hon. And then people know what it is we're paying for and why it is. How many acres we've talked about this.
Yeah. So I will make a note of that.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we may have some of that information on CivicMic already, but we'll double check and make sure that it's out there so everyone can see that. Jeannie, would you like to unmute?
Yes, thank you. We're just wondering why all of a sudden this has come up, that there's this big shortage.
Well, so I hesitate to say that it's something that's come up just this year. So if you saw by the graphs, we actually had a deficit in each one of the fiscal years, pretty much for the last 5 fiscal years. Public Works has undergone a staffing structure change. So we have some new people on board and we have NBS here helping us to really take a fine-tooth comb to these districts to identify some of these deficits, identify where we need to improve, and then also what the districts can actually afford. So all of those staffing changes has happened within the last year and a half. We've gone through, last year was the first full cycle. We've started to take that fine-tooth comb, which is why we identified the deficit to begin with in June of 2021. And as we move forward, we will continue to make sure that we are not only looking at the current fiscal year and the fiscal year immediately following, but we will be projecting out 5 and maybe even 10 years if possible.
Thank you for that, Chris. Rick, did you have a question? I know there's some people having a hard time with raising their hand. I saw yours as well, David. So I'll go to Rick, then David, then I'll do some of those that have raised their hand on the screen.
There is no raise my hand at the bottom of my screen. So I was texting to your office, and that's why you have me on here. The bottom of my screen just says participants chat, share screen, record. It doesn't say raise hand. So people may have questions, and if they have the same screen I do, they're not going to be able to ask you a question. And I'm just suggesting that, yes, please go on so that people can ask the questions. The purpose of tonight was to be able to get information to the people and then allow them to ask questions. And I don't know if that's going to take place. Pam brought that up as far as we do need more question time than was originally allowed. So I'm going to
Okay, so let's go ahead and focus on those questions then, because we all understand we want to ask some questions, but now we're down to a group of 88. So let's keep the questions moving. David, would you like to unmute and ask your question, please? I'll ask you to unmute. So
yeah, unmute. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I think I'm in Rolling Hills district, and I think the big things we're really concerned about are mowing, weed abatement, herbicide, sprinkler maintenance, those types of things. When we received the postcard from CivicMic, I think initially it said the first news we had, it said the landscape budget will be reduced from $330,000 a year to $81,000 a year. This will result in a reduction of the following services. It listed 3 things: tree, plant, and bark replacements. And I thought, well, that's no big deal. Pest control and fertilizer applications, well, we could maybe do without that. And then tree and shrub and ground cover trimmings. So those are the 3 things that are listed on what was going to be reduced. And then there's another document on CivicMic that says Rolling Hills service reductions, which is a detailed spreadsheet and which covers a lot more of the important things like mowing. But it doesn't compare at all with the postcard that we got. And I'd like to just segue over to the survey that we got. Now, question number 7, the order of importance of 5 different things did not address mowing, weed abatement, herbicide, sprinkler maintenance. It addressed pet, kid-friendly, water-saving, eco-friendly, scenery, cost-effective, and safety. And those are not the big items that the residents are concerned with. So my question is, how did we come up with those questions on the survey? And why is there a gap between what we saw on the postcard and the spreadsheet that says Rolling Hills service reductions?
Danielle, you're on mute.
Oh,
I was going to say, David, we could talk offline about how some of the engagement questions are crafted. A lot of those questions are very general that cover specific topics, and we can determine based on the answers to those responses to those questions, which of those very detailed items, such as herbicide, where those would fit in priorities. Like I said, this is not the last meeting for the community, right? We're going through a process that's going to take over a year. So we're taking very different approaches to find information, refine your responses, and then hone in on what's really important to each community. So I understand not everyone on this call will agree that the process that's taken place so far is what they think they would have done, but you know, that's kind of the path we're going. But we're definitely open to hearing from as many people as possible. So reach out to us, David. We'd like you to be on the working group. The working group will help to educate your neighbors and community members about this process and about the districts. And you can share some of that insight there and what you'd like to share as well, and how we craft the message for the next meetings. So we really appreciate your feedback on that. Let's go ahead and go with Shonda. Did you have a question? Go ahead and unmute.
I just heard the answer you gave David, and I'm now reluctant to make my statement. I actually think he very articulated what I wanted to say partly very well. And I'm worried that you maybe didn't hear him by your response that you gave. And I wish I had the time. I'm trying to make the time to participate in this process, but everybody doesn't have the ability to ongoing participate in this process, but it doesn't mean that it's not important. I am worried that the literature and the information that has gone out thus far does not provide adequate information about what we're really talking about, because I too was thinking, like, what kind of landscaping? Because some of that stuff they could just stop doing. But when you get down to the nitty gritty, it's some really important things like mowing the lawn. But the initial information that was given and everything that I've seen so far doesn't really give me information for me to vote whether or not I would want my money to go. And I'll give an example of just ignorance on my part. I don't know. I'm learning about this all through this process.
Right.
I had to,
along with your neighbors too. So
right.
it's a
I was
lot of
walking
information.
along and I
Right.
asked myself, is water included in what they're talking about? Because some of the grass looks like it's dying just because they're not watering it. Like, forget mowing it. I just think they need to turn the water on. And then I walk a little further over to the park and I'm thinking, well, they're flooding this whole area. So maybe they didn't get some. So I was thinking, well, who's paying for the water? And so it's just basic. I don't know. Is water included? So that's my question, but more just, I think the information's not adequate.
Yeah, thank you for that, Shonda. We definitely have a lot of information in detail on civicmic.com, but any questions like that, and I know everyone doesn't have the same amount of time to invest, but if you can shoot us an email, give us a quick call and say, hey, all I gotta say is I think there should be more information about water. You know, we noted that here. Noted about the mowing and also the detailed services. So Chris will work with us on that to make sure we get that out to you, because any of those questions you have, if you have it, likely your neighbor has the same question, right? So don't feel bad about asking those questions. That's why we want to hear from you. And even if you can't participate on the working group.
And Danielle, I just want to jump in. The chart that was created that shows the services that were being provided and the reduction of services, we do actually have that on the CivicMic website under the legal and administrative documents. I see it at least here for LLMD 11. Oh, it's here for it's here for all districts. So it is on the CivicMic.
Right. Thank you, Chris. Richard, did you have a question? Richard Wood, you can go ahead and unmute.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, it seems like we got into this situation because there was no inflator included in the funding formulas when these maintenance districts were originally set up. But it just seems logical to me that that sort of thing would have to be included in anything like this that's going to go on for a long period of time. Is that something the law allows, or is it something that you have to vote on every time, or what?
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Sandra Burkhart, and Sarah had to step out early for another meeting. But yeah, the CPI inflator is something that would be part of the formation process, and we absolutely would include it. Once it's approved as part of the formation, that's the only time it needs to be approved. It will be approved as part of the formation, and then annually, the CPI inflator would be applied to the maximum assessment rate. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. I was wondering why it wasn't done originally, but I'm glad that we can. If we have a new assessment and we resolve this issue, I certainly would want an inflator to be included so we don't have to come back and do this again.
Absolutely. And the laws have changed over time, and that's why inflators weren't necessarily a part of these older districts, but we would include them in the new districts, and that would be on your ballot to approve that.
I'd just like to add, we may include them in your new district. So that would be something that will be discussed at the specific community meetings within your community about your new assessment. Because Richard, while we definitely see a lot of benefit in having an inflator, so we don't have to go through this process again in 3 to 5 years. If community members are not willing to approve a higher assessment amount because of an inflator, then that's something we want to consider as well. So that's definitely one of the questions that we'll continue to work through over the next 6 to 8 months when we're developing this. So good question, Richard. Thank you. I have Brian Grabber. If you'd like to unmute, do you have a question?
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for all the good information tonight and sharing that with us. Very insightful. One of the slides you showed was a chart showing where the shortfalls were, and it appeared that a lot of those shortfalls fell in 2019, when we went through COVID, and then extended into 2020. But that's just an assumption on my part. But my question is why aren't we using a part of the money received, which Fairfield received $21.5 million from the Federal Recovery Act for these shortfalls?
I'm not sure. I'm too familiar with the terms of the monies received for the Federal Recovery Act, but I don't believe that any of those monies are intended to be used for this special purpose for landscaping and lighting if the shortfalls were not due to COVID. Again, I'm not too familiar with that, but because these shortfalls were not a direct result of anything that happened because of COVID, I don't think we would be entitled to use any of that money for these purposes.
Is it possible to check on that? Because I understand in other cities, they've been able to use that money into all kinds of different things.
Sure.
So
We'll definitely work with the city to look at some of the ARPA funds and different funding available, and then put that on CivicMic to let everyone know how those funds can be used and if that's an option there. So thank you. Actually, thank you, Brain Grabber.
That's my nickname. It's
All
Brian
right.
Garber, but thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Carol, did you have a question? Would you like to unmute?
Yes, I sent you a chat. Do you want to read the first question? Did you get it?
Let's see. Bianna, did that go directly to you?
Yes, it did. Let me find it 1 second. Okay, so the first question was, are there fees from CivicMic and MBS included in the assessments?
Yes, a portion of the assessments will go to pay for these services.
And then Carol's second question is, was there a bidding process for a contractor to perform these services, and how was a contractor chosen?
No, NBS was procured in accordance with our procurement policy, which states that all professional services can be procured based on qualifications and not necessarily lowest bid. So NBS was determined to be the most qualified company to provide these services. Also, the company that has the most resources available, for example, staff. NBS does have a good team that was available in the time frame that we needed to be able to provide these services in the next couple years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. It looks like we have one more question here in the chat. I'm going to ask that, and then if there are other questions, we're going to move forward and try and answer those, and then we'll get to wrapping this up soon. We've had a lot of participants jump off now that we've been a little bit over time here, but this is from Robert. It says, I live in Rolling Hills Sanctuary Valley area. This weekend, I noticed that the fire access roads behind our homes have growth of weeds and as tall as a person. Are the roads part of the services that are being cut? Chris, is that something that you know specifically?
In the Rolling Hills area, there is an open space area in the back, which is a different, I believe is a different funding source, but what I can do is check in with our operations team to confirm. I'm sorry, who asked that? Maybe we can get that person's contact information so we can get exact locations.
Yes, Robert, if you would like to email us directly at contact@civicmic.com, then we'll get that answer directly to you. Joe Green.
Yes, I submitted a comment via chat to Brianna. It has not been answered yet.
Okay.
Question.
Okay, the comment is, in the future, prioritize chat questions before verbal raise hands, otherwise grandstanders dominate at others' expense.
No, that's not the question. It's the earlier one.
Earlier. 1 second.
What happens if we had no special benefit, basically? What's the base level of service the city would provide if nothing's approved and we don't have a special district?
If there was no special district, likely there would be zero landscaping services. The lighting services that would be provided would be just electrical. If there were any special lights, like some of the decorative lighting, if there were repairs needed or one just went out, it would be replaced with the standard Cobra head lighting. But likely all of the landscaping would not be serviced unless it was on a thoroughfare like Manuel Campos or Hillborn, major thoroughfares like that.
So would it be torn out and just covered with rock where we have shrubs and things on roads? What would happen?
Likely, yes.
No.
Likely it would be replaced with drought tolerant, bark, rocks. We would probably make those decisions on a case by case basis, but yes.
Thank you for that question, Joe. Leland, and then I'll go to iPhone who's unmuted already. Leland, go ahead. You're unmuted, but we cannot hear you. We'll go ahead and go to the iPhone that's unmuted. And then Leland, if you can work on your audio, we'll come back to you. Okay. Were there any questions of individuals that did not raise their hand? If you'd just like to unmute and say your name. Okay. As we talked about, any questions?
Hi,
Diana?
my name is Diana.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I walk along Hilborn. I live in Rolling Hills, and I noticed that the weeds are growing taller and taller, and they're going to seed now. And I guess I'm thinking that as they go to seed, they're going to plant more weeds, and the more weeds there are, when they finally do have a bid come in, it's probably going to end up being higher because it's going to look worse. So I guess my question is, can we, the people that live in the neighborhood, pull those weeds? Is that okay? Is that violating something?
I imagine there may be some liability issues with that. We do have our city attorney, David Lim, on the line here. I'm not sure if he has an answer, for that off the top of his head, or he may have to do a little more research.
Sorry, Ken. This is David Lim, the city attorney. Diane, can you ask the question again? So you're asking, can someone just go onto the public right of way and start pulling the weeds?
Well, I'm just thinking about just walking along Hilborn. So there's the sidewalk. I don't know if you've been there. You've probably driven on it because it's kind of the back road, the back way to avoid the freeway when it's full. But yeah, just walking along the sidewalk, there are just tons of weeds growing. And I'm wondering, can we just pull those, put them in a bucket and, put them in our yard waste containers? Just like as we walk, I see other neighbors do this too. We just pick up garbage because, there's just garbage that people throw out, and I pick it up as I walk. Can I just pull weeds also?
Yeah, Diane, you actually answered the question the way I was going to answer it. There's no legal magical formula. People, if I'm walking down the street and I see litter in my street, I'm a good citizen. I go ahead and I pick it up. There's no harm in doing that. It's good civic participation. I think what you want to avoid is if you, start forming, like a gardening party, and you go out there with a weed whacker and shears, that probably raises some concerns of potential liability for the city. I hate to be the wet blanket, but I'm the city attorney, so I'm answering as a lawyer. But obviously, if you go out and pull some weeds, just like if you go out and pick up trash to help out your community, I don't think, you're doing it on your own. So, it's sort of hard to say, well, the city made me do it, and so I'm going to hold the city liable. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah,
It does
and
answer my
Diana,
question. Thank you.
to David's point, Diana, we can, in the working groups, that's some of the things that we can talk about, ideas for cleaning the community. And then we can go back to the city and ask for options on organizing some of that. So great suggestion or question there.
Do you have more questions, or can I ask one more, or do you have other people lined up?
We do. I'm sorry. We'll go to a couple more and come back to you. Jordan, go ahead. You can unmute.
Hi, yeah, I had a question for David also. My house sits in an area where I have open space behind my home, and in the past I've gone back there because of the fire hazard to try to trim the weeds and keep things down. Is it possible to enter into an agreement with the city of Fairfield as like an adopt a park or adopt an open space where we could figure out what liabilities there are and maybe come up with an agreement on what we can do and what we can't do? to keep our main concern in this area is just the fire hazard. I mean, 2 years ago, we had the fire coming over the hill. It was probably a quarter mile from our homes. So we're really concerned about the fire hazard. And like someone previously mentioned, along the walkway between the open space and the homes, there are weeds that are probably 8 feet tall already. And we're not even, near fire season. So is there a way we can enter into an agreement with the city to be able to take care of that open space and not be liable for being cited for something?
So that's a great question. And number one, I'm sorry that you have to deal with the stress of, your open space and the fire dangers. That's a question I'm going to refer you to Public Works and probably our zoning department, because there are mechanisms in place if you're dealing with open space land and you want to get some sort of variance either for, zoned property or city-owned property. It's sort of outside the range of this LLMD discussion, but there are mechanisms. It comes up from time to time when people want to cut down a city tree or do something on city property. There are mechanisms in place to discuss that with the city. So I would refer you back to either Public Works or the Building and Planning Department.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I know the Public Works head is on this meeting, so I am sure he's probably taking a note, and he can get in touch with you, or you can email me, and I'll make sure that he gets that message.
Okay.
We'll also make sure all questions that are asked tonight that did not receive responses, we'll make sure to follow up with the city to get those answers.
Yeah, I'll jump in just briefly, Jordan, if I may. So Jordan, my name is Paul Koshel. I'm the Public Works Director. Another option that we could look at is discuss with our fire department, our fire prevention bureau. Our fire marshal takes calls like these or inquiries like these because they help manage the open space areas and actively work with a contractor to abate these open space areas in response to or ahead of the fire season. And so they do it at least a couple of times a year where they look at those areas. So we could engage with them as well to look for opportunities.
Well, my experience in the 5 years I've lived here, the only mitigation that there is in the entire year is there are sheep that come and they eat for about 2 weeks and they leave. And there are lots, I mean, they do as good a job as a sheep can do, but there's no personal attention of people coming and actually looking what's back there and seeing what needs attention and what doesn't need attention.
Okay, fair enough. Well, we can engage with the fire department and see what else might be able to be done there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul and Jordan, for that. Bianna, you had some other questions in the chat?
We have a few more questions from the chat. So for LLMD number 7, why the sharp increase in expenditure in 2020-21?
Excellent question. Excellent question.
So that question was answered earlier in the presentation. The contract for landscape services was ended, I think at the end of 2019, and a new contract was out to bid, and all the bids that were received were up to 50% higher than expected. And so the city did go with the lowest bid available to them at that time. And so that's the reason for the increased costs around that time.
Another question we have is, why is the loan amount for Rolling Hill so much greater than the other areas?
Chris?
For that, it is just due to the landscape services need, the water services need out there. It also has to do with the funding balance that each district had available to them, leading up to this point. So it just worked out that in order to provide Rolling Hills with those same services, this is the amount that the loan amount that they need for that.
Another question is, what exactly does landscaping and lighting do?
So the landscaping and lighting services provide an enhanced level of services other than what you would find in other public areas throughout the city. So in many places throughout the city, neighborhoods individual property owners take care of their own landscaping on their property. And there's little to no landscaping in the public right of ways, no landscaping on the major thoroughfares. So these landscaping and lighting maintenance districts provide, I would say, enhanced, I keep using that word, but that's pretty much what it is. You'll see more greenery, you'll see different types of plants, you'll see the decorative lighting rather than just the standard Cobra heads. And that's really the purpose of these districts.
Thank you, Chris. Let's see, Sam, did you have another question?
I did, just an observation. I was looking at the chart that you put up for, and we're in Paradise Valley, and the chart would give the appearance that we have a marginal decrease in service to kind of correct the shortfall. And from my observation, and I'm out there like every day, the reduction in service has been radical. I mean, it's the Paradise Valley Road, the weeds and the ivy that's taken over homeowners' fences. There's just a lot of stuff there that is not addressed at all anymore. So from my observation, the reduction in service has been radical. That's it.
With this, we have to, a 10% reduction in budget for landscape services doesn't necessarily equate to a 10% reduction in overall services provided. The reason for that is costs go up. So whereas, let's say, mowing cost $10 before, now it costs $12, right? And so it's not a direct correlation between the amount of services we received and the total dollar amount that we've reduced. So although the chart is showing the dollar amount that we've reduced the dollar amount, it doesn't necessarily correlate to the amount of landscaping services we've had to reduce in order to keep under that dollar amount there. So if you refer to the chart, though, that's on the CivicMic website, you can see exactly what services have been reduced, their quantities and frequencies, et cetera. That'll give you a good indicator, or a good picture of what you could expect at this time.
Okay, thank you. The one thing I noticed that before with a previous contractor, you'd see somebody out there nearly every workday doing something, whether it's leaves or trimming or mowing. Now we're lucky if we see somebody there once or twice a week. It's just not working so far. So thanks a lot, though. I appreciate the meeting.
Thank you, Sam, for that question. We have a couple other questions that came through the chat. So why use the general fund loan instead of just using funds from the general fund? I think we covered that earlier, that this is really special benefit to each community. So general funds can't be granted to a community for special benefit that isn't given to the entire city. Then there was a question about the Federal Recovery Act, which we covered, and we'll make sure to put that information on civicmic.com, and what things can be done to control rising costs. Paul, maybe that's something you can talk about, as well as they want to know who is holding the city accountable for the work. So I think both the rising costs and the work that's being done to make sure that the services are actually being provided that the city's paying for.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. So as we set up the landscape maintenance contracts, those are overseen with the help of our operations department, and we have a division that oversees landscape maintenance. Within that division, we have 3 landscape inspectors, and so they monitor the work. They administer the landscape contracts. And then as part of that effort, they do, they coordinate with the landscape contractors, and they do inspections and reports that go along with that, and follow up on the work, as well as review the work against what's required in the contract, as they provide and complete invoices to pay the contractor for their work. And we have had to, in the past, withhold payment when the work hasn't been performed, and at times, unfortunately, had to fire contractors if they continue to not perform.
Thank you for that, Paul. So we are at 7:30. We've had more than half of the participants drop off the call. We want to make sure that everyone that has questions gets them answered, but we also want to share that information in a easy manner with the community so people can find the answers to those questions. So I'm going to take Randy, Rick, and Pam. Those will be our final questions. After that, if your question wasn't answered or something comes up, right when you hang up the meeting, please email us at contact@civicmic.com. That's CIVICMIC.com. We will respond to your questions. If we don't know the answer right away, we will work with the city to get those answers, and then we'll post all of that information on the website so your questions are all answered, and the email address is there in the contact. So Randy, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
I just had a procedural question. There's a reference to a working group. The first meeting is on April 28th. Is that going to be an ongoing group?
Yes, that is.
Okay. I have volunteered to join it, but I can't be there on the 28th. So that was my only question.
Okay, yes, please reach out to us. That will be ongoing. And, someone else mentioned they don't have a lot of time. You can join the group, find out the information, and get added to the email list so we can share what others are doing, kind of the grassroots efforts to help your neighbors learn and, participate when you can. So great question. Thank you, Randy.
All right, thanks.
Rick, would you like to ask your question? You're on mute still. Here we go. I'll ask you to unmute.
There we go. Very good. I want to thank Chris for her information on the 4 lines of options. What will happen if we get a loan and we don't go with a new district? For my district at Paradise Valley, it will not be a problem. Rolling Hills is the problem area. If Rolling Hills gets a loan and does not approve a new district, the remaining $83 or $83,000 that's currently being spent in maintenance will go to pay the loan. There will be no funding available for maintenance. That was not very clearly brought up. She did a good job. It did express that if the loan is approved and the new district is not approved, that it will be a negative impact. The clarity would be that all of the remaining maintenance funds would go to pay the loan. And I wanted Chris to go ahead and address that if she could, just to clarify. I'm going to make sure I'm not saying anything out of class or out of turn there, but I believe that to be very accurate. Chris?
So over the 5 years, yeah, I think the loan payment would total, what is the 480? Yeah, $80,000 for the annual loan payment, and the total landscape services contract is about $80,000. Now we would try to do a combination of landscape and water. I mean, it would be a combination of the two. And if no services were being provided, maybe we could reduce the staff time. So I think it'd be a combination between all line items, but essentially most of the services would go away for those 5 years.
Great question, Rick. Thank you. Pam, would you like to take yourself off mute?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation this evening. I'm going to be having a series of town hall meetings in each district to talk about this further, but I just want to ask if there is any information available to our residents regarding what increased and decreased levels of services, what that actually means, where they can go online and say, okay, I live in district 7. This is what increased services looks like. This is what decreased services looks like. So yeah, I think that would be helpful for people trying to make a decision on how to how they're going to vote on this issue. What does increased and decreased services actually look like? And
are you referring to, Pam, sorry to interrupt you, are you referring to like a visual picture? Because we have the services currently offered and the services that what those line items look like, but are you thinking that like a visual, a picture of what the landscaping looks like now and what it could look like? Is that what you're referring to?
No, what I'm referring to is what decreased and increased services actually means. So does it mean, like one of the earlier people, one of the earlier residents, you know, mentioned, it doesn't mean, you know, like weeding, weed abatement. I mean, what exactly are people paying for?
So we have those details exactly on civicmic.com. So we can email them out to you as well. Anyone on here that wants that emailed to them, feel free to reach out to us. But we do have those line items. That's what Chris was saying earlier in the call. She was going to look those up and make sure we put them out there. But we already have that detailed information available. As far as new services and enhanced services that could be a potential for community members, when you go to cast your ballot on a higher assessment, that will all be determined in the future working groups that we'll have. So that's kind of where we're honing in on what priorities are for each community and what's really important. And then that'll be used to craft the new assessment with new budget numbers and then come to you and your community and say, okay, we heard that, you know, landscaping is really important, mowing the lawns, green grass, lots of water, changing out the flowers, that's important to your community. And if we look at those priorities, this is what that new assessment will look like. So as far as future potential, that's going to be worked through over the next 6 months. As far as decreased services from where it was, that's available already on civicmic.com. But like I said, we can email it directly to you if that's easier.
I would just encourage that we make this information as user-friendly as possible, so that it's right up front, so that everybody can access it, you know, at the click of their, you know, modem or whatever. So
right. Thank you for that, Pam. Yeah, good advice. We'll move a link to the main page there, maybe make it as easy as possible. So thank you. Thank you, Pam. Thank you all for sticking with us tonight. Like I said, please reach out to us with any other questions you have. We'll be more than happy to get your answers posted on the website. This entire presentation will be on the website if you'd like to share it with your neighbors and help us to keep others informed. So once again, thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.